Hey there, guys. TC Made with TC Gaming. Wanted to bring you an update. We've been wrestling a little bit with a couple of things and wanted to try and get all this back in there. So my plan was to talk about adding new enemies and this async loading screen thing, and I want to do the async loading thing independent of the enemy issue because they're two separate topics. I want to keep them as separate threads. This video should be pretty quick. In the marketplace, you can download a thing called Async Loading Screen, which I show you here, and then add that to your project and your plugins. Just enable it, just a typical thing. Now, when you do the async loading screen, there's a thing in here for documentation and tutorials, which will take you out to their GitHub page. And on the GitHub page, it explains to you a lot about how this works and where you can, how you can get your movies to run for your loading screen. Instead of using loading screens, you can use movies. You can also use little widgets to have the counters go by. You can have like little sequences and stuff like that. It explains all that in here. I'm not going to go through all that because there's a lot of documentation for it. But what I'm going to show you is that when you bring that in, the reason we're bringing it in is because in the Action RPG sample, when you go from 4 to 5, or even in the 4 version, if you tried to package that for release, the loading screens that are in there, the way that works, it was bottlenecking the threads, I guess, and it's not loading properly or whatever. You get a lot of issues with. Sometimes it doesn't compile properly. So what the recommendation was from the update process is to actually disable. If we go down here, trying to read this section right now. Yeah, he says, I would recommend disabling the nodes calling the native loading screen using the free plugin Async Loading Screen, which received an Epic Mega Grant. And then he shows you screenshots of where all these different level loading logics are. So this is the BP game instance, event graph for level loading logic, and this is the one where it fades in and shows loading screen open level by name. So what we do in our code is we go and we replace that, and I'll show you how to set this up. So if we go into the project, you go into project settings. So first of all, let's go, if you went into the plugins, you would go to async. You'd find this, you'd flip on async loading screen. Once you had that enabled, you'll restart your project. And then when you go into edit project settings, you can go into async loading screen down here under game, and you'll have an options window here. So on these settings, the display times, this is the one for general, and then you have the one for the startup loading screen and default loading screen. So this is going to be obviously when your game first launches, and then this is going to be as each individual level gets loaded or called inside of the editor, or inside of the project rather. So they recommend in here when you're doing this in like a debug mode, put a minimum loading screen time in here, and they did it for like 10, just to show you how it works. So I did that here, minimum screen loading time 10. If you put it for packaging, you'd want to put it at -1, so it runs at whatever the time is of the machine that it's on. There's no delay. And one of the things in here that we flipped on, come down, here's where you specify where your backgrounds are going to be, what images you're going to use for your loading screens, and they have an index array 0, 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. So you can put some pictures in there, and this is what will pop up. So I have grasslands on the transition from the first level to the second level. Actually, you'll see this at the loading of the first level because the 0 would have happened earlier, I guess, and then this one pops in. I don't have one in between the other two. But I'm just setting this up so I can show you how it works. I haven't really gone through and configured everything myself. But there is a thing in here where you want to say set display background manually. I have that flipped on because what we can do then is we can tell it which one of these indexes to call when. So you would have an index of loading screens for each of your level transitions, and then you could say in a variable in the code to call that specific loading screen for the level transition you're getting ready to go to. So you could have a table that had that reference in it, or you could just have an incremental counter like we do on the other ones. So once we have this async loading screen plugged in and enabled, we can go out here and we can look at what we had in our documentation over here for game instance event graph. So if we go into our game instance, which is right here, instance, here's your level loading logic. And you can see what I did here is I took your, after we get our level data table and we remove all widgets, I set the enable loading screen. Now mine right now is turned off. So I have this turned off, and then I would want to display the background for index 1. This is what I'm saying. You can put a variable here. And so you can start this counter and say, if it's level 1, show index 1. If it's level 2, show index 2, so on and so forth. You can load those up how you want to. I shut this off because I was working through some other stuff, and I disabled the original, which is the fade in and show loading screen. But basically, by turning this on, if you go into your project, and remember I had that set up at the 0th position, or position 1 in mine was the first image. In order for this to show up, you need to run this in standalone game mode, because it will not run if you're just in the viewport. This is level logic that happens outside of that for some reason. But if you go down to your little triple dots here and you go to standalone game, it'll load over here. And what you should see is, since there's that window that I have for the level pops up that was on there for a couple seconds or whatever. So I'm going to go into start game, and there's the level transition screen for it. And again, this is happening at every transition. So what I was going to do is I was going to wait and not turn that on until I go through a certain phase, like, at the end of this level, that these intros play. I just haven't set it up to do that yet. But you can obviously put that logic in wherever you want to turn that off or on. Now, in my wave 1, I've just modified this for a second because I'm going to show you guys how to add a new enemy like this. So this is coming up in the next episode of how we're going to put an enemy in there, and I have to modify some animations to make it work. But anyway, I got to beat this level. It's like we did in the previous versions. We beat level 1, which has, I think, 3 total spawns in here. Last one. And we beat this guy. And then we should get a level load. Wave complete. And we're going to transition over to our next level. And there's our loading screen. Now that loading screen's not the right size for the game. That's why you see that little white border at the bottom. And then, once the 10 seconds elapses, we'll go to our level load. Okay? I don't have anything in this level yet. This was just a transition to one of the maps that we have coming up. And this game, if you look at the resource on here, this barbarous character comes from the Infinity Blades pack. And these are Infinity Blades resources. And the reason I brought these in is because I'm going to show you how to build levels using Dungeon Architect. Again, that's a sidebar, but you could use these assets to generate some things real quick, and then we can pull in additional level sequences. So my plan is you would pop into an area like this, you would come through, you'd have a couple of characters here, boom, 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 kill these guys, come up to the next area, boom, 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 kill these guys, or whatever. As you make your way through the level, you would get... kill each of the characters or whatever, and then when you get up to the top area, you'd spawn an actual boss spawn. Like, say, maybe up in this area here or something, there'd be a boss spawn, and you kill that boss spawn before you go to your next level. So, that's where we're going to be heading with that. And again, if you just enable that plugin, that Async Loading Plugin, you can go through and specify all the different screens that happen at different times. Now, mine went black the first one, and then it called that other one, incrementally, and then it pulled it in. If I take that level loading logic off of there, so that it's not enabled, I think that you'll still see a transition in there for the one thing. I don't know why that happens by default, and it could just be that, again, that portion of the level load isn't getting called in that particular sequence. But if you got here to the documentation for this, where they talk about setting, right here, configuring the loading screens and stuff, they show you in here where you put your background images in to your array. And then they also talk about in here somewhere there's nodes that you can call to display a background with an index on it based on, which way you're going, and then open your level. So like here they open background index 4 with tooltip indexes of 2, which display things on the screen. Give you all kinds of other little stuff, like showing you that in here. But there are videos on YouTube. If you got to YouTube and look at async loading screen tutorials, There's one of them that's from Leaf Branch Games. This is probably a pretty good one. He usually has some fantastic stuff in there. But he'll show you how to go in there and configure that also, and to show the different transitions and what it should look like at the end.
So
there's his game starting up.
What's happening because we skipped
in the darkness.
Yeah. So he used a little intro movie in here.
Currently set at screens.
Kind of showing you that one, and then there's another one. So again, I would recommend the Leaf Branch Games one, but there's one in here too. Talks about how to make a loading screen. Might be this one. There's some recommendations in there in the documentation for the update. Right here, the guy that talks about this. This tutorial here, I think, is probably the one that I'm looking for. So that link to that document is in my
so you just need to put these two in here. MP4s are preferred.
Links there. But yeah, this is the one here. This actually shows you, like, you know, what the problem is and then how to fix it. You know, how to go through and actually do a deep configuration on your loading screens and to get this all set up exactly what you want to.
Moves and everything. Although
so I would recommend watching these tutorials. I'm not going to deep dive into the async loader, but I'm going to tell you that you want to disable those nodes, swap these out with the async loading, and get that configured for a game that you're going to package and release or run in an actual executable version. Okay. That'll solve one of those problems for you. So I'm going to call this the end of this video right here. If you have any questions about the async loading thing, there's plenty of documentation out there for that outside of what we're talking about. But I'm gonna call this an end to this right here, and I'm going to move back into talking about adding a new enemy to the game. That was a highly requested thing, and I was having some trouble with it, so I'll talk about that in the next video. You guys take care, and I'll see you soon.